They say home is where love waits for you, but I learned the hard truth. Sometimes, home is where betrayal hides. I'm Margaret, born in 1952 in Augusta, Georgia. Back in 1989, when I thought my family had my back, my own blood turned their faces away when I needed them most. I felt small, humiliated, like the world was pressing me into the dirt. But then something happened. Today, at 73, I'm finally sharing this because silence has chained me for too long. If you're listening, drop your city below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so more people hear stories like this. I'll never forget that day in Atlanta. My son, Daniel, had called me a week earlier, his voice dripping with promises. "Mama, we'll all be there to greet you at the gate. The kids miss you so much." His words stitched hope into my heart, hope I hadn't felt in years. So I packed carefully, folding my best dress into the worn leather suitcase that had traveled more miles than I could count. I even baked a pecan pie, my grandson Jacob's favorite, so it would still be warm when I arrived. On the bus ride, I kept smiling to myself, picturing little Sarah running into my arms, Daniel lifting my bag, and his wife, Monique, finally treating me with respect instead of disdain. But when I stepped off that Greyhound into the thick Georgia heat, no one was there. Not a single soul. My heart sank as the other passengers reunited with their families, laughter and hugs filling the station. I stood alone, clutching my pie and suitcase, the hope draining out of me like water through cracked hands. I told myself, maybe they're late. Maybe traffic. But as minutes ticked into an hour, my chest tightened. Finally, I hailed a cab with the few dollars I had left and gave the driver Daniel's address. The ride felt endless, my stomach twisting tighter with every street corner we turned. When we finally pulled up, the house looked just as I remembered: neat lawn, blue shutters, the American flag waving proudly on the porch. But something was off. No children's bikes on the driveway, no toys scattered in the yard. Just stillness. I knocked once. No answer. Knocked again. Nothing. By the third knock, my knuckles stung, but the silence inside stung more. At last, the door creaked open, not by Daniel, not by Monique, but by Jacob, now taller, thinner, his eyes wide as if he'd seen a ghost. "Grandma," he whispered. "Yes, baby. Where's everybody?" I smiled, relief flooding me. His lips trembled. They didn't tell you?" Before I could ask more, Monique appeared, her eyes cold as January frost. "Margaret, what are you doing here?" I came. Daniel said you'd be waiting at the gate." "The kids," my words stumbled, confused. She crossed her arms, blocking the doorway. "Plans changed." Those two words sliced deeper than any blade. Plans changed. As if I was an afterthought. As if my son's promise meant nothing. "Can I at least come in?" I asked, clutching the pie like a shield. Her eyes narrowed, scanning me like I was a stray dog. "Fine. But don't stay long. Daniel's busy." Inside, the house felt different, colder, though the air conditioner hummed. Family photos lined the mantel, but my face was nowhere among them. Not even the picture I'd given them of me and Daniel when he was a boy. It was like I had been erased. I sat at the edge of the couch, Jacob hovering near me. His little sister Sarah peeked from the hallway, shy and unsure, until I opened my arms. She darted to me, burying her face in my chest. That moment kept me breathing. "Where's your daddy?" I whispered. Jacob hesitated, then answered softly, "He's upstairs." "But Mama said." "Jacob." Monique's voice cracked like a whip. "Go finish your homework." He froze, then obeyed, his eyes apologizing in silence. I sat there, heart pounding, pie cooling untouched, until finally Daniel came down. His hair grayer, his eyes tired, but his face held a look I hadn't seen before. Guilt. "Mama," he said, voice low. "Daniel." My throat tightened. Why wasn't anyone at the gate? "You promised." He glanced at Monique, then at me. Things got complicated. Complicated. I laughed bitterly. "Son, I traveled all this way, pie in my hands, heart in my throat, and you call it complicated?" He looked away. "We didn't think it was the right time." The right time. Those words hit like a slap. When had I become so unwelcome that my own son weighed whether it was the right time to see me? I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but Sarah clung tighter to me, her little fingers digging into my arm as if she knew I was on the edge of breaking. So I swallowed my rage because I would not let Monique see me fall apart. But in that silence, I noticed small things: a missing photo frame on the wall, Jacob's downcast eyes, Sarah's whispered question, "Grandma, why doesn't Daddy smile when you come?" Those little cracks in their perfect picture began to show me the truth. And deep inside, a seed of fury planted itself, one I would water with patience until it grew strong enough to break through every lie they had built. Because I realized something that night. I was not just unwelcome. I was being erased. And if they thought I'd go quietly, they had forgotten who I was. I sat on that couch, Sarah curled against me, pretending to nap though I felt the wet warmth of her tears on my blouse. Monique paced the kitchen, heels clicking sharp against the tile like a metronome of my humiliation. Daniel had retreated upstairs again, leaving the air heavy with unspoken truths. The pie sat untouched on the coffee table, steam long gone. I glanced at it and thought, even the pie feels rejected here. Sarah stirred and whispered, "Grandma, don't cry." I hadn't realized a tear had slipped down my cheek. I kissed her hair and forced a smile. "I'm not crying, baby. Just tired." But inside, my chest felt like it was splintering. When Sarah finally dozed off, I stood quietly and looked around the living room. Every detail gnawed at me. Family photos, school portraits, Christmas smiles, birthdays, but none with me. Not even one. It was as though I had never existed in their lives. I drifted toward the mantel. There had once been a frame I'd gifted Daniel on his 30th birthday, a picture of him as a boy sitting on my lap, his face full of sunlight. It was gone. In its place sat a glossy family photo, Daniel, Monique, the kids. A perfect picture, except it felt like a wall between me and them. Monique's voice snapped behind me. "Don't touch the frames." I stiffened. "I wasn't." "You always act like you own the place," she cut in, her words sharp, bitter. "But this is my house now, Margaret. My rules." My fingers curled. I wanted to tell her she'd never own Daniel's soul the way I raised him, but I swallowed the words. I had to play it carefully. Instead, I said softly, "I only wanted to see my family." She smirked, pouring herself a glass of wine. "Funny. That's what you call it. Daniel calls it meddling." The word struck me like a knife. Meddling? After all the nights I worked 2 jobs to keep him fed? After the times I walked miles in the rain so he could have bus fare to school? Before I could respond, Jacob came down the stairs, holding a notebook. He glanced nervously between us. "Grandma, can you help me with my math?" Monique opened her mouth, but I stepped forward before she could deny him. "Of course, sweetheart. Bring it here." He sat beside me, flipping pages. As I leaned closer, I noticed his handwriting was shaky, smudged in places, as if he'd erased something quickly. My gut told me this boy was carrying a weight he couldn't name. While we worked through fractions, I whispered, "Are you okay, Jacob?" He looked up at me, eyes wide, lips parting, but then Monique's shadow fell across us. He shut his notebook instantly. "I'm fine," he muttered, standing too quickly. "Thanks, Grandma." He bolted back upstairs before I could say another word. Monique tilted her head, smug. "You see? They're fine without you." I forced a smile I didn't feel. Kids don't hide when they're fine. Her face twitched, just a flicker, but I saw it. That tiny crack in her confidence. It gave me a strange kind of fuel. Later that night, Daniel finally reappeared. He sat in his recliner, staring at the muted TV, while Monique washed dishes loudly, making sure I heard every clink. I cleared my throat. "Son," I began, voice steady though my hands trembled, "why'd you tell me you'd be at the gate if you didn't mean it?" His shoulders slumped. "Mama, it was Monique's idea. She thought, maybe it'd be easier if you didn't come." My breath caught. Easier for who? For her? For you? Because it sure wasn't easier for me, standing alone like a fool at that station. Daniel rubbed his temples. "You don't understand, Mama. Things are tense here." I leaned forward. "Then make me understand." He looked at me finally, his eyes shadowed with something I couldn't place: shame, fear, or both. But before he could speak, Monique cut in, drying her hands with a towel. "She doesn't need to know everything, Daniel." I turned to her, my patience snapping. "I'm his mother. I deserve to know why I was lied to." Her lips curled into a cold smile. "Because you're not part of this family anymore, Margaret. You're a guest. And soon, not even that." The words hung in the air, thick as smoke. I wanted to shout, to throw the pie at the wall, to demand Daniel defend me. But he just sat there, silent, broken down by the woman who now controlled his home. That night, lying on the stiff guest bed, I couldn't sleep. The house creaked around me, whispers in the walls. I thought about Jacob's shaky handwriting, Sarah's whispered, "Don't cry," and Daniel's hollow eyes. Something was wrong here. More than just Monique's cruelty. Something deeper. And I decided then, I wouldn't leave quietly. I would watch. I would listen. And I would find out exactly what shadows my son's house was hiding. Because if Monique thought she could erase me, she'd forgotten one thing: I'd survived worse than her cold smile. And I was done being erased. The next evening, Monique announced we'd be having a proper family dinner. She said it like a command, not an invitation. The tone made me uneasy, but I agreed. If this was her battlefield, then I'd sit at her table and face it. The dining room looked staged: candles flickering, polished silverware, plates set perfectly. But the warmth that should have filled such a room was missing. Daniel sat at the head of the table, eyes glued to his plate, while Jacob and Sarah fidgeted silently. Monique placed the roast in the center like it was a trophy. "Let's eat," she said flatly, sitting down. We bowed our heads to pray, though I noticed Daniel's lips never moved. When the amen ended, silence settled over us like a heavy fog. I tried to break it. "Sarah, how's school going, baby?" She brightened, about to answer, but Monique cut her off. "We don't need to bore Grandma with school stories. Let's talk about something real." The way she said real made my stomach turn. I forced a smile at Sarah anyway. "I'd love to hear." Sarah looked down at her fork, lips trembling. She didn't say a word. I shifted my eyes to Jacob. "And you, Jacob? Reading anything good lately?" His eyes lit for just a moment, but then Daniel cleared his throat. "Jacob, pass the potatoes." It was like every attempt I made to connect was cut short. The table was a performance, and I was the audience no one wanted. Finally, Monique turned to me, smiling with sharp edges. Margaret, I suppose you still believe you know what's best for Daniel and the kids, don't you? I set my fork down. I don't suppose, Monique. I'm their grandmother. I want to be here for them. Her laugh was bitter. You were gone for years, Margaret. And now you just expect to slide back in as if nothing happened. My jaw tightened. I was working, sacrificing, doing everything I could so Daniel could build a life. Daniel muttered, "Let's not do this." But Monique pressed on. Everything you could? Or everything that kept you away? Tell me, do you even know Jacob's favorite subject? Or Sarah's favorite color? Her words stung, not because she was right, but because I realized how much I had missed while trying to keep myself alive. I opened my mouth, but Jacob's voice interrupted, small but steady. Her favorite color's yellow. Mine's history. The whole table froze. Monique shot him a glare, but he held her gaze. My heart swelled. He'd given me a lifeline. I smiled softly. Yellow and history. Good choices. Jacob looked down quickly, but I saw it. The flicker of defiance. The tiny spark they hadn't crushed yet. Monique slammed her wine glass down. See, Daniel? This is what happens. She stirs them up. Enough, Monique, Daniel said quietly, still not looking at me. I leaned forward, my voice steady. Stir them up? You mean remind them they have a grandmother who loves them? Who refuses to disappear? The air thickened. Even the kids stopped moving, waiting. Monique's smile returned, venom sweet on her tongue. You think love fixes everything? Tell her, Daniel. Tell her why we didn't meet her at the gate. Daniel's hand gripped his fork so tight his knuckles whitened. His lips parted, then closed again. He looked at me, eyes heavy with sorrow. Finally, he whispered, because Monique said you'd only bring trouble. My breath caught. Trouble. Monique leaned back, satisfied. That's right. Your so-called love always came with drama, Margaret. You think I don't know about the loans? The eviction notice? The way you begged Daniel for money behind my back? The shame burned in my chest. Yes, I had asked Daniel for help years ago, when the bills piled higher than my courage. I had chosen survival over pride. But before I could respond, Sarah's tiny voice broke through. Grandma doesn't bring trouble. She brings cookies. Silence. Monique's face flushed. Daniel's fork clattered against his plate. Jacob hid a smile. I laughed softly, though my throat ached. Out of the mouths of babes, I whispered. Monique shot up from her chair, her napkin falling to the floor. This dinner is over. Daniel didn't argue. He just sat there, defeated. As the kids scrambled from the table, Jacob slipped a folded paper into my hand, so quickly Monique didn't see. My pulse quickened. I tucked it into my pocket. Back in the guest room later, I unfolded it. In shaky handwriting, Jacob had scrawled, "Grandma, check the attic. Don't tell Mama." My breath hitched. The attic. A chill ran down my spine. Whatever Monique was hiding, Jacob wanted me to find it. And suddenly, I knew. The shadows inside this house weren't just cold stares and cruel words. There was something more, something waiting above my head. I folded the paper back, my hands trembling, and whispered to myself. They wanted to keep me out. But I'm already inside. That night, while the house finally went quiet, I sat on the edge of the guest bed with Jacob's note clenched in my hand. Check the attic. The words pulsed like a heartbeat. I knew I had to move carefully if Monique caught me snooping. I might not see another sunrise in that house. I waited until the clock on the dresser ticked past midnight, the air conditioner's hum covering my steps. I slipped out, the floorboards groaning softly under my weight. Every shadow felt alive, watching. The attic door was in the hallway ceiling, with a pull string dangling down. My heart thudded as I tugged it gently, the creak loud as thunder in the silence. I froze, listening. Nothing. Slowly, I climbed up the ladder, each rung colder than the last. The attic smelled of dust and secrets. A weak bulb dangled from a cord, its light trembling like it feared being here too. Boxes were stacked high, labeled with years, but one sat apart unmarked, almost shoved into the corner. I crouched and lifted the lid. Inside were old blankets, brittle photo albums, and beneath them, a leather-bound book. A diary. My fingers trembled as I opened it. The first page stopped me cold. If something happens to me, let this be the truth. The handwriting wasn't Jacob's. It wasn't Sarah's. It was Daniel's. I sank onto a dusty trunk, reading by the flickering light. Page after page poured out my son's voice, words I hadn't heard him say aloud in years. He wrote about loneliness, about how Monique controlled every dollar, every decision, even who he could see. He wrote about the fear in Jacob's eyes when she snapped at him, about Sarah crying herself to sleep. Then I turned a page and my blood ran cold. Mama, I don't know how to tell you this. Monique said you're poison. She told me if I let you close, she'll take the kids, and I'll never see them again. I'm trapped. My chest ached so sharply I pressed my hand to it. I could almost hear Daniel's voice in those words, the little boy I raised, begging for help. Further down, his writing grew shakier. I don't know how long I can keep pretending. If you ever find this, forgive me. Tears blurred the ink. I clutched the diary to my chest, rocking slightly, the attic spinning around me. My son wasn't my enemy. He was a prisoner. A creak below startled me. I snapped the diary shut, heart racing. Had someone heard? I pressed myself into the shadows, listening. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. Coming closer. The ladder shook. A whisper slithered up. What are you doing up there, Margaret? Monique. My grip tightened on the diary. I forced my voice steady. Couldn't sleep. Thought-eyed. Look around. The ladder rattled again. That's my house. You don't get to poke through my things. Her tone was sugar-coated threat. I shoved the diary under my blouse, against my skin, and pulled a blanket over the open box. By the time her head appeared, I was brushing dust off my hands. Just some old blankets. Nothing much. Her eyes darted around, suspicious, but she smirked. Careful. Wouldn't want you to fall. At your age. She let the words dangle like a noose. I climbed down, diary pressing against me like a heartbeat, praying she didn't notice the lump beneath my shirt. She followed me with a predator's smile, satisfied she'd unsettled me. Back in my room, I locked the door, sat on the bed, and opened the diary again. One entry stood out, dated just weeks earlier. If Mama ever comes, I pray she sees the truth. Jacob and Sarah need her. I can't keep protecting them alone. I closed my eyes, whispering to the empty room, I see it now, son. I see it. But with seeing came a rage that burned hotter than any humiliation I'd ever endured. Monique hadn't just kept me from my grandchildren. She'd built a prison inside my son's own home. And now I held the key. The next morning, I slipped the diary into my purse. Monique eyed me over her coffee, but said nothing. Daniel avoided me, eyes hollow. The children barely spoke, though Jacob glanced at me with the faintest flicker of hope. I knew what I had to do. I had to force the truth into the open, no matter the cost. So when Monique announced we'd be having guests for Sunday lunch, I smiled sweetly and said, "Wonderful. I'll be there." Because I had already decided, Sunday wouldn't just be lunch. It would be the day Monique's fortress began to crumble. Sunday came heavy with heat, the Georgia sun pressing against the windows as if it wanted a front row seat to what was about to unfold. Monique bustled in the kitchen, humming a false tune, while Daniel sat silent in his recliner, eyes lost somewhere far away. Jacob and Sarah dressed neatly, but their faces carried the weight of secrets too heavy for children. When the guests arrived, two of Monique's church friends, and their husbands, the house buzzed with forced laughter. Monique played hostess like a queen, serving her roast and pouring wine, acting as though this house had no cracks in its walls. But I felt the diary in my purse like a fire against my side. We gathered at the table again, the same polished setting, the same uneasy silence lurking beneath their smiles. I kept my head low, waiting, biding my time. Monique raised her glass. "To family," she said sweetly. I lifted mine just enough to be polite. "To truth," I murmured. Her eyes flicked to me, a spark of suspicion flashing before she plastered her smile back on. Dinner moved along, conversations shallow as puddles. Then, as Monique laughed too loudly at something one of her friends said, I reached into my purse and set the diary on the table. The room stilled. Forks froze midair. Daniel's face drained of color. "What's that?" Monique asked, her voice sharp. I rested my hand gently on the cover. Daniel's words. His truth. Her laughter cracked. "Don't be ridiculous." I opened to the first page, my voice steady, strong. "If something happens to me, let this be the truth." That's how it begins. Daniel's head snapped up, his lips parting. Monique's smile faltered. "Stop. This isn't the time." "Oh, it's exactly the time," I said, my voice rising just enough to cut through the air. "For too long, you've hidden behind silence. But no more." I read aloud, Daniel's words trembling through the room. Monique said if I let Mama close, she'll take the kids, and I'll never see them again. The guests gasped. One woman covered her mouth, eyes wide. Daniel's eyes brimmed with tears. "Mama," he whispered. Monique slammed her hand on the table, rattling the dishes. "This is private. You have no right." I cut her off. "No right? I'm his mother. I'm their grandmother. And you've been using fear to keep me from them." Jacob's voice piped up, trembling but clear. "It's true. She told us not to talk to you. She said you'd make Daddy leave." Sarah clutched his hand, nodding quickly, her little eyes brimming. "She said you're bad, Grandma. But you're not." The room erupted in whispers, the guests shifting uncomfortably. Monique's face turned crimson. "Lies. They're just children." Daniel's voice thundered, louder than I'd heard in years. "Enough, Monique." The table went silent. He stood, fists shaking at his sides. "I'm done watching you tear us apart. Mama's not the enemy. You are." Monique's eyes widened, fury blazing. "After everything I've done for you." Daniel pointed at the diary. "After everything I wrote down because I couldn't say it out loud." "She's right. You've controlled us for too long." The guests quickly stood, muttering excuses, their eyes avoiding Monique's as they hurried out. The front door clicked shut, leaving only the family in the wreckage of truth. Monique turned to Daniel, her voice trembling now. "You'd throw away your marriage for her?" He looked at me, then at his children. "No. I'd throw away the chains you put on this family." For the first time, Monique's confidence cracked. She sank back into her chair, her eyes darting wildly. You'll regret this. I rose, placing the diary in front of Daniel. No, Monique. The only regret will be yours. Sarah climbed into my lap, her small arms wrapping around me. Jacob stood beside us, taller than I remembered, his face set with determination. Daniel whispered, "Mama, I'm sorry." I touched his cheek. "Don't be sorry. Be strong. For them." In that moment, I knew the fortress Monique had built was beginning to crumble. She could glare, she could threaten, but the truth had been spoken. The chains had snapped. And the best part? It wasn't me who broke them. It was Daniel. It was the children. It was the power of truth that Monique could never silence again. But I also knew this wasn't the end. The storm had only begun, and I was ready to weather it with them. The silence after Monique's threat was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. She sat there, shaking, her painted nails drumming against the table like a nervous storm. But for once, she had no words sharp enough to cut me down. Daniel stood tall, his shoulders squared in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy. "No more," he said firmly, his voice carrying the weight of every page in that diary. "We won't live like this anymore." Monique's lips curled, a final attempt at control. "You'll regret embarrassing me in front of our friends." I met her gaze, steady and unafraid. Embarrassment fades. But the truth? That lives forever. Jacob placed a hand on his father's arm. "Daddy, we don't want to be scared anymore." And that was it. The crack in Daniel's heart burst open, flooding the room with resolve. He pulled his children close, shielding them with arms that once felt too weak to fight back. Monique stood abruptly, her chair scraping hard against the floor. "You think you've won? You'll see how hard it is without me." Daniel didn't flinch. "We'll manage. We'd rather struggle in peace than live in your prison." She grabbed her purse, eyes blazing, but I noticed the tremor in her hands. At the door, she turned, her voice venomous. "You'll all come crawling back." I smiled softly, shaking my head. "No, Monique. The only crawling here is the truth you tried to bury finding its way into the light." And then she was gone, the slam of the door echoing like thunder. For a moment, the house felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted off its very walls. Daniel collapsed into the chair, burying his face in his hands. Jacob leaned against him, while Sarah nestled in my lap, her little fingers clutching mine. Daniel's voice was muffled but steady. "Mama, I don't know what comes next." I stroked his hair, the way I used to when nightmares woke him as a child. "What comes next is freedom, son. You've already taken the first step." That night, the house didn't feel so cold. The photos on the wall hadn't changed, but the air had. For the first time in years, it felt like a home, not a prison. In the days that followed, Monique tried to call, tried to twist Daniel's resolve with promises and threats, but he didn't answer. He blocked her number, changed the locks, and began rebuilding with his children. One afternoon, I found him sitting on the porch, the diary open in his lap. He looked up at me, tears glistening in the sunlight. "I almost lost them, Mama," he whispered. "You didn't," I said softly, "because you found the strength to fight." He smiled faintly, then handed me the diary. "I don't need this anymore. I don't want to write my fears down. I want to live without them." I pressed the book to my chest, pride swelling in me. My boy, my Daniel, had finally broken free. And me? I had been erased, dismissed, treated as a shadow. But now I was the light they couldn't ignore. The kids began to laugh again. Jacob showed me his history projects. Sarah painted pictures of yellow suns and smiling faces. Even Daniel's laughter slowly returned, hesitant at first, then stronger. Justice hadn't come from a courtroom or a judge. It had come from truth spoken aloud, chains broken in the quiet courage of a family reclaiming itself. And as I watched the children chase fireflies in the yard that summer evening, I whispered a vow: never again will I let silence steal our love. So if you're listening, remember this: no matter how deep the shadows, truth will always find its way to the light. Hold on. Fight back. And never, ever let anyone erase you. Drop your city below if you've ever had to stand up to cruelty. Like this video if you believe truth always wins. Subscribe for more stories like this and share it, because someone you love might need to hear it tonight. Even when lies build walls around you, truth and courage can shatter them, restoring love, dignity, and the freedom you deserve.